Controlling the display of numeric information is one of the most important things that many Excel users need. This worksheet, like many an Excel worksheet, is loaded with numbers. Look at the information in columns E and F. We've got salaries here, and nothing wrong with those entries really, but it's pretty much of a convention that as soon as we have 4 digits in numbers, we'd like to see commas or some way to read them more easily. Don't overlook the idea that selecting the entire column often makes sense. This will not use up any additional memory. It doesn't make the file any larger. Why not select both of these columns, drag across here? The fastest way to change the display of these numbers in a sensible way might be on the Home tab in the number group, choose $. And by the way, you may have noticed as I slid over that $, the pop-up Accounting Number Format. In older versions of Excel, before 2007, frequently you would look at this $, and would say currency, counting number format, not in everybody's vocabulary. Now, would that be a good choice here? And I'm editorializing a bit here. For a lot of us, this is too many $. We see too many in every single case here. Let's use comma instead. Now, this is not the opposite. The name doesn't quite ring true. We're not sure what it means if we haven't used it. What does comma do? Essentially the same thing, but without the $. Unlike other kinds of formatting buttons, for example, bold, italic, underlining, the $, is not truly an on-off or a toggle button. Click $, we see them. Click $, again, nothing happens. So even though these two are not the opposite, for many people it becomes the two most important formatting buttons when it comes to numerical information. In either case, and depending upon the circumstances, it's going to make sense not to show the decimals, perhaps, decrease the decimals. You're likely to want to see either 0 or 2 decimals. And of course, these buttons here. If this were scientific data, you could easily imagine situations where we might want to show more decimals. We can easily make these adjustments here. And as always, formatting simply changes appearances. We are not changing values here. What if the needs are greater than this? What if some of the data we have doesn't quite fit, or perhaps we're surprised with some of the choices here? In columns J, K, and L, we've got numerical information, financial information as well, perhaps. Let's drag across columns J, K, and L. $, might be a choice, might not be. But what I wanted to bring out here is the idea that negatives, of course, will appear from time to time in data. Is that the way you would like to see them displayed, the way we're seeing them in column L? That is the standard accounting notation style. If we choose comma, watch the difference, we'll still see the parentheses. Not everybody understands or uses parentheses this way. And so what we need to be exploring here is the idea that sometimes the buttons that we see in this number group on the Home tab are not sufficient for all of our needs. And you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner an arrow. You'll also see this, by the way, on the Alignment tab, on the Font tab, and when other tabs in the ribbon are active from time to time, you won't see any on the Formulas tab, for example. You will see them on the Page Layout tab. But going back to the Home tab, this dialog box launcher, as it's called, activates a dialog box, the Format Cells dialog box. Now, this is one way to activate it. We'll show you a few more. This is very familiar to longtime users of Excel, and many, many times it takes us behind the scenes. It gives us more choices for those choices perhaps that are not so obvious. Now, it could be that the choice you're looking for is something you really are going to need often. So let's not minimize the use of this. And as we look at this, what might we choose here? Here's another choice called currency. Now, notice when I click on currency, you'll see the different choices here. If you prefer the negatives to have a leading minus, you might choose this option here. I'll click OK. We're not dealing with the decimals just yet, but you see what happened there. It actually shifted the data to the right. Now I'm going to press Control-Z to undo so you can see that again. And now press Control-Y to redo. This is the difference. Accounting notation puts in parentheses, and it needs that extra half space to the right. Notice in row 5 here, this data, this 34,469, has that half space out to the right so that the decimals line up properly. So it's a decision you have to make as to which kind of format works best for you. Again, clicking column L just for the moment, choosing comma, that's the choice we see, the negatives in parentheses. If that's not what you want, one choice could be click that dialog box launcher and then choose currency and then choose a different negative. Now you could choose red, of course, or red in parentheses. I'm just, for contrast, I'm choosing the leading minuses here, and we see how that plays out. Now, ideally, you should be consistent here, and so if we were doing this, perhaps we would again go to that same location. Instead of clicking the dialog box launcher, there are two shortcuts that you should be aware of. Control-1 activates the Format Cells dialog box that we just saw. You see that here. And by the way, the tab that will be active is the one that you used when you most recently used this particular dialog box. If you had just been making font changes, had we come here, we'd see some font choices instead. But for the moment, we're interested in numerical choices here. Notice also there's another choice called number. And this doesn't give us any options to put in currency symbols. Currency, of course, does allow the $ here and other kinds of symbols that might be appropriate to your needs as well. So in a certain sense, you could say, if you're dealing with numerical information, you might want to explore number, currency, and accounting. And as we'll see a bit later too, there are some keystroke shortcuts associated with these that will make them a bit faster. So you have to make a decision here and there about what works best for you. I frequently steer people back to the idea that try and use $ and comma and be happy with it, and then you won't have to go behind the scenes and explore some of the other options. But here's another aspect of this that you wouldn't see necessarily. And you wouldn't probably see it in a column like this, but I'm going to, on purpose, take both of these columns and make them substantially wider. Sometimes in financial reports, you'll see large numbers and smaller numbers within the same column. And look at the $ here. They're off on the left-hand side. Now, that may not be what you want, and so what you could choose here, and you wouldn't do this instinctively, but once again, pressing either Control-1 or the dialog box launcher, activate Format Cells again, and this time possibly choose currency. Click OK. Watch the $. So sometimes that's meaningful too. So we see the variations with the various number choices that we see here. Once again, recapping. For fast, easy changes, $ or comma as needed. You decide on the display of decimals, decrease, increase as needed. If you have negatives, think about whether the comma approach works because it does put in parentheses. If not, either right-click, choose Format Cells, or press Control-1, or use that dialog box launcher and change these to a display that suits your needs best. We can quickly and easily format numbers of this nature by using the buttons in the number group on the Home tab, $, comma, and where necessary, increase and decrease decimals. Excel has quite a few different keystroke shortcuts that are going to help you speed along the process of formatting numbers. In column B, for example, we have sales times of day, 24-hour type times here. Nothing really wrong with that. But if you would like to see AM, PM, there's a keystroke shortcut, and only one, for arranging the display of time. And it's Control-Shift-@. Perhaps you might think, I'll meet you at 3 o'clock. Maybe that's how you'll remember the at symbol. Control-Shift-@. And that's on the same key as the number 2 is. Over in columns M, N, and O, you'll notice that some of these shortcuts we'll be using here are displayed here. Control-Shift-@. Some books, by the way, will display that as a shortcut. They might use the term Control-@. Of course, you'd have to use the Shift key to get to it. So however you think of it, it is there on this key that has these two symbols on it. And the change in column B is we now see AM, PM. For some people, they're more comfortable in understanding this display than the 24-hour type. Nothing truly wrong with column C, but the one keystroke shortcut associated with dates is Control-Shift-#. Now, perhaps that pound sign might remind you of a calendar grid. That never occurred to me once until I saw that in a book. But Control-Shift# does display the month as 3 letters. And for some people, that eliminates that momentary doubt when they're looking at a date as to which month it is. Now, column D is just pure numbers, and nothing wrong with the display there either, although it's sort of a convention that when numbers reach 4 digits, it would be appropriate possibly to have commas here. Many of you know that the comma button in the number group on the Home tab certainly gets the job done pretty fast. Now it does introduce decimals, nothing wrong with that. I'm going to press Control Z. And by the way, before I do, notice that these numbers here do have a half space behind them. And that indicates that if the values were negative, they would be in parentheses. And for the moment here, I'm going to press Control Z to undo. The keystroke shortcut that's closely associated with this, but slightly different in the way that it handles negatives and in the display here, is Control Shift exclamation point. And it's referred to as number format. So the difference here between this, and watch the display difference now when I press the comma button. Watch that half space on the right. Let me see what's happening. I'm going to press Control Z and put a minus in front of this. And again, re-emphasizing what we're doing here, Control Shift exclamation point. We'll keep the display the same. There we go. And watch the comma button, watch the difference. So here and there, even though that's not synonymous, that Control Shift exclamation point isn't synonymous with comma, they're very close. And you might consider that as part of your repertoire of shortcuts here. Columns E and F, many people use the $ button. I certainly do a lot. It does apply a counting format, and that's fine. If the column's wider, the $ will stay on the left-hand side of the cell. A closely associated keystroke shortcut, but again slightly different, is Control Shift $. That's on the number 4 key. Watch the display difference here. The big obvious difference is that the $ are next to the numbers. Many people don't care where the $ is, and so if it doesn't bother them whether the $ is on the left side or next to the numbers, they'll use the keystroke shortcut or this. But again, note the difference. The keystroke shortcut puts the $ next to the numbers. The symbol here, the accounting format, puts the $ out here. And once again, with negatives, I'll put negative here just for the moment. This is the display we get on the $. What's Control Shift $ going to do for us? We see the difference. So you have to decide whether these shortcuts, which are not exactly identical to the buttons here, are going to work for you. There's no question they're fast. And let me change this back again by pressing Control Z back to here. A quick formula here for calculating percent of change. Equal, this is one of many different ways to write the formula, the later amount divided by the earlier amount minus 1. Now the answer here we would want to see is a percent. And surely there's a percent button right there, and there's also a keystroke shortcut that is identical to it, and that's Control Shift %. And we see the display there. It's sort of a rule of thumb that if percentages are below 10, you want to see at least one decimal, so we could increase the decimal there. Recopy this, then copy the formulas downward by double-clicking. Now here, again, emphasizing the idea, the keystroke shortcut and the symbol here are identical. Whether we click this or press Control Shift %, we get exactly the same display. In both cases, we would need, if we wished, to increase the decimal this way. Now, columns J and K have scientific information in them. Not everybody deals with that kind of information, but if you do, you are familiar with scientific type notation. Let's highlight both of these. Control Shift, the caret symbol above the number 6 key, displays these using scientific notation. The numbers in column J were well below 0, and this number here is readable as 6.32 times 10 to the minus 2. The numbers in column K, as we saw them, were well above 0. This is 1.65 times 10 to the 6th. Pressing Control Z again just to go back to remind ourselves the difference there. Control Shift caret. Now, the default format in any worksheet as we begin working with a worksheet is general, and many times we don't need to go back to a general format. But if that need were to arise, for example, in column D, if you want to display these in general format, and usually you don't want to go back to them, it's Control Shift tilde. That's the key just to the left of the number 1 key. And so all the shortcuts that we have used here in this movie are found next to each other on the keyboard, to the left of the number 1 key, and then reading down as we actually read across the keyboard 1 through 6. Here are all the shortcuts that we just used. They're adjacent to one another. And here and there, I think many people are going to use 3 or 4 of these on a frequent basis. I know I do. They're fast, they're easy. And again, there are some slight differences here and there with the buttons that we find on the Home tab, but they're a lot faster many times when you're dealing with data to simply press one of these keystroke shortcuts. Not every numeric formatting need is going to be met by a keystroke shortcut, and many times the choice that you need for a particular set of numbers is also not available in the number group on the Home tab. You may well be aware that the dialog box launcher in the lower right-hand corner of the number group does allow us, by way of format cells, to see quite a few different options this way. Keep in mind also, we can also get here with Control 1. Let's take a look at some of the data in this particular worksheet called Special Formats. Nothing really wrong with the date display in column A. However, there are some other alternates and quite a few built into Excel. Many times when we're formatting, particularly in database type layouts, it's going to be faster and easier to choose the entire column. And rather than clicking the column first, I'm simply going to be right-clicking column A and go right into Format Cells. And we're on the Number tab here. We want to be looking at some date layouts. Quite a few choices here. Notice some of them have zeros. Some of them just show, for example, the day of the month and a 3-letter abbreviation for the month. This is ideal when the entries are all from the same year, but you see quite a few variations here. And I think for many people, they're going to find something they want here. So that's easily available. Just pick one of these, for example, for a difference here. Maybe a long display this way. That might be the one you want. It's certainly going to take up more space, but if that's what you want, you've got it. How about column B? Same idea. I'm going to be right-clicking column B, going right into Format Cells this way. Time layouts, we see some choices there. Here, I think the number of choices for most people is going to boil down to either the second or the third one. Now, depending upon the kind of day that you have, if it does involve hours, minutes, and seconds, you might want to consider some of the others here. But I think for the most part, most people are going to gravitate toward one or two of these. Do note that you can display date and time together. That is appropriate for certain kinds of data. Now, Social Security number, this is not so obvious. Let's say that whoever put in the Social Security numbers here had a good idea, and the good idea was, why should I have to type those hyphens? Somehow there ought to be a way in Excel for Excel to do that. Well, there is a way. Ideally, what you want to do here, though, is do this even before you put in the data. But let's say, here's the data, and nothing wrong with this. Right-click column D, Format Cells. In the Number tab here, we want to go to Special, and there we see Social Security number. Now we see the hyphens, but recognize as I click on cell D2, we don't see hyphens in the formula bar. If we happen to double click here to edit, we don't see them. We don't want to be typing them. Why do all the work? Let Excel display these as part of the format. So if you're making a change here, maybe this doesn't have to be corrected, you put in a 7 or whatever it has to be, you don't deal with the hyphens at all, you just press enter. Same idea with phone numbers. We've got 2 sets of phone numbers here. And again, do this even before you put in the entries. Why type 14 characters when you need only type 10? Right-click Format Cells, Special, Phone Number. It handles 7 and 10-digit numbers. These days we rarely see just the 7, but nevertheless it handles both of those. We'll click OK and watch the display change. And here too, as with Social Security numbers, the symbols are not truly here. You don't see them in the formula bar. If you double click, if you edit that way, you won't see them here as well, and you don't want to be typing them. Now, if you do get data from other sources where these symbols actually are in place, it doesn't take too long. Now, they're not truly here, but if you really had these, you could do a quick search and replace all those left parentheses and right parenthesis space and hyphens with nothing. You have to do that in at least 3 steps. But then once you had your data in order from there on in, anytime you needed to make changes or additions, you wouldn't be typing all these extra characters. So be aware of those that are built in. Now, with fractions, I don't think too many people are using these as they might have in the past, particularly with stock market type quotes, but nevertheless, you will see these. In the example here, these are simple formulas. What might surprise you here is, with some of these, you might say, well, is that exactly even? We're seeing simple displays here. What if we were dealing with numbers where the quota was over 100? I'll make this be 102. Or maybe to make it more interesting, give an odd number there, 103. 126, that's not right exactly, is it? When you're displaying formats of this type, again, right-click Format Cells, there is a choice called Fraction, and note that it might be displaying these as a single digit, 2 digits, 3 digits, and you'll just have to decide which is going to work for you. If I choose 1 digit here, I think you'll see this is not a great choice. Some of these are not really accurate. For example, this one here, that's not 5/8 really. It's close enough for most of us, but it's not really the case. So what you want to do in situations like this, and again, I don't think too many people use this, but just be aware that it's there. Format cells. If these are fractions, you might want to display 3 digits, 2 digits. In scientific type applications, this is a poor choice because these numbers, as we see them, are not exact. Now, we have the same situation here with regard to percents. We have some options out here as well too. And the standard rule of thumb on percents is if the percents are below 10, you want to show decimals, otherwise you don't need to. So I think many people would be happy with the displays here as well too. I don't think you'd want to use fractions here, but once again, if you were to use that with format cells, you could go down that path and decide how many displays you want. Perhaps this way, perhaps not. So some ideas on how to display different kinds of numbers available again, typically by right-clicking. You can also press Control-1 to get into the Format Cells dialog box and to explore lots of different options for different kinds of number displays. If you have unusual numeric formatting needs, and it's better that you don't, but if you do, you should be aware of something called a custom numeric format. In column B, we've got ID numbers, and maybe the way your company for years has displayed these ID numbers is to have 4 numbers, then a hyphen, and then 3 numbers. And the data in column B doesn't display that way. We'd like to be able to just type in numbers and have the hyphen appear there, perhaps in a similar way that we can do this with Social Security numbers. So let's right-click on column B here and choose Format Cells. And in the Format Cells dialog box on the Number tab, the last entry is Custom. If you've ever looked at this list and started to scroll through this, you could easily become overwhelmed. And without denigrating anybody, this looks a little geeky. That's the term we use sometimes, a little nerdish perhaps. Now, I use this occasionally, and I'm not proclaiming any unusual expertise here. Occasionally, I understand what all these symbols mean, and then I forget. I don't use it very often, let's put it that way. But here and there, you want to be aware of what some of the symbols mean. And it is, without focusing on any of these necessarily, let's start with a simple idea that in the early part of this list, you'll see zeros here and there. A single zero simply means a numerical character. And if we're trying to explain what we're trying to do in column B, one way would be to say, we want to see 4 numbers and then a hyphen and then 3 numbers. So in the custom category, in the panel right under the word type, we can click in here, take out whatever's here simply by typing over it. I want to represent 4 numbers, 0, 0, 0, 0. By the way, if there are leading zeros, I don't want any of those zeros suppressed, so I put in the 4 zeros. And then I'd like to see a hyphen, so I'm going to put double quote, hyphen, double quote, and then 3 zeros. Pressing Enter, column B will be reformatted. In this case, we've got to make the column wider. We'll double-click right here, and we see the display. And there's already a built-in format for phone number, but you may have seen, and I certainly have seen, phone numbers where the area code is followed by a period, and then the next 3 numbers, they used to call it exchange, is followed by a period. So let's change this. Column C, right-click, Format Cells, Custom, and we'll simply use a format of 3 zeros, double quote, period, double quote, 3 zeros, double quote, period, double quote, 4 zeros. So within double quotes, we don't see the double quote on the display, of course. We want a period. So embedded within the double quotes is the symbol that we want to put in here. And it doesn't have to be a period, but this one certainly is used from time to time. Once again, readjusting the column width. So that's a different way to display this. So you can make up your own. I think you get the idea on how you might do that for some of these. Now, in columns E and G are some other unusual formats, and maybe a little strange here and there, but on the other hand, you should know how to do these. And here's a tip too. When you do see numbers like this displayed, Suppose I sent you this worksheet and you might say, well, I wonder how you got that or how this happened. Right-click on one of these, like this one, go to Format Cells, and there is the display. And there it is. Now, that's not so obvious either. What is it? General, and then you see asterisk period. I wonder what that means. General asterisk period. Maybe take a look at this one here. Right-click Format Cells. What are we seeing here? Asterisk underscore general. Well, maybe you figured it out, maybe you haven't, but the asterisk in these particular formats, these custom formats, signify that whatever follows the asterisk will be repeated, and then if there's anything else in the description, that will be used. So what we're doing here is preceding numerical general type formats with as many underscores as is necessary to fill in the column. I know that's a mouthful, but again, asterisk followed by underscore, we're going to use as many underscores as is necessary along with the general format of the number to fill in the particular cell. So these numbers are of different width. We see what's happening here in all these cases here. They all have the same format. And here, once again, revisiting this format, right-click Format Cells, we see asterisk period following the word general. So the numbers go in first, then trailing periods. And so the more of these you see, the more you pick up on them. And this one here, possibly, and probably how this was done, is these were initially formatted. Let's take a look at this first of all. Right-click Format Cells. And here the details may be a bit much, but the key element of this is the asterisk followed by period. Now, probably the way these were set up was that someone did apply currency or accounting format and then made the adjustment. So here's some numbers down here. Maybe these numbers here might look good if they had leading dots, not dollar signs, but dots. So how might we do this? If we'd like to see commas as well, maybe we'll choose comma first up here. Maybe we don't want the decimals, we'll decrease twice. And now, right-click Format Cells. Here's the current format, and without going through all the details here, behind the asterisk here, in the particular format for this cell here, we're going to put a period and then get rid of the space. Now, another bit of information about this, when you see semicolons here on numerical formatting displays, this is the display that will be used if it's positive. Then we see a semicolon. This is what's going to be used when it's negative. We want to cover all bases here. The key element, again, is after the asterisk here, we want to put in a period and then delete the space that follows it. And we'll do that one more time out here. Period, delete the space, and click OK. And now we've got our leading periods or dots in this format. So you may or may not need to experiment with some of these, but just by seeing a few examples, you will get some ideas. If you have greater interest in this, there are a number of different books. The Excel in-depth books usually have 8 or 10 pages on various kinds of custom formats that you might be interested in. In addition to all the built-in formats for dates and times, you might want to display the date and time in your particular way. The data in this particular worksheet is the same all the way across columns A through F in the following sense. Cell A1 has a date, 8/7/2010. We see it in the formula bar. It's displayed differently in B1, but it's the exact same date, and in C1 and D1, E1, and F1. Same thing over and over and over again. But how do we change these displays? Column C has a standard built-in display. A couple things to note about it. The day of the week is spelled out, the month is spelled out, and the date is put in as 2 digits, and so the dates before the 10th have a leading 0. So you might want to make some changes here. I'm going to right-click on column C and go to Format Cells. Here's the display that's being used. Now, if you want to alter this and build your own custom date format, simply switch the category to Custom. Now, not exactly obvious, but 4 Ds here represent the full spelling of day of the week. In this same display, you see 2 Ds over here. That means that the day is going to be displayed as a number with a leading 0. If we put in a single D in this portion of the format, it means that the date will only display one number if it's before the 10th. The other dates will be 2 digits. If we want an abbreviated day of the week, we'll put in 3 Ds. So just wipe out this existing information here, put in 3 Ds. If we want, for example, to show SAT and MON and that sort of thing. The 4 M's mean the month is spelled out. Suppose we want an abbreviation there. Take out one of those M's. You see the change. 3 characters for the day of the week, 3 characters for the month. And maybe do the same kind of thing here, slightly differently in column D, format cells. Maybe this time we might want to even change the order. So here too, we could jump into custom. Maybe we'll put the month first. 3 M's. Spell it out, possibly. We can put in a space, maybe. Let's put in the day of the week. I probably wouldn't put it in this order typically, but let's put in 4 Ds. Maybe we'll spell it out. So that's likely to be what? That's going to be AUG Saturday. In other words, you're in control of how you put in the display here. Saturday, this would be a little bit strange. This would be AUG SAT 07. Let's take out the leading 0, put in a single D. Click OK. I think most of us probably wouldn't use that kind of display, but you quickly get the idea, and by jumping back in here with right-click Format Cells, you can see how you could use M's and D's and Y's in a variety of different combinations. If you want only a 2-digit year, put in 2 Y's, and so on and so on. Now, the display in column E is unusual, and we see actually the year displayed, and by right-clicking on one of these entries, you can see pretty quickly what's going on here. 4 Y's, 2 M's, 2 D's. And there too, we could put in hyphens if we wanted to, very simply here, by doing this. Do it this way. I only did that for one of the cells, but you see that kind of display as well. So there are quite a few variations on how you can do this. And I wouldn't say you need to have all these, but just be aware of that capability. And you can also insert words and phrases here. And these entries here, it looks as if they are times of days, but what if they were simply amount of time elapsed? In other words, what if the display here were different? We'll change it this way. And let's say that the actual nature of these are different so that they truly represent maybe an elapsed time period. There's no heading at the top. A different way to display these, and not so obvious, but here's what we can do here. What if we switch to custom here, and in the display here, we use H followed by double quote, and anything within double quotes will appear as text. So we might have a leading space. I'm going to type in the word hours, space A-N-D, space, double quote. So we want to see the actual hours followed by the phrase space hours, space and space, and then what? M. Now here it doesn't mean month, it's going to mean minutes. And following that, we want, within double quotes, a space, and then minutes. Double quote. So that we see the entry being displayed this way. And again, that display under Format Cells, you see it right here. Bring it down, see them both together. There's the display. So you can imagine quite a few variations on this in terms of displaying. And I think you're more likely to change the display with dates, but also with times, as we see in the example here. You do have control over your own custom formats for date and times.